Happy birthday! Hey, it's Larken Roast. Today is the 100th birthday of the federal income tax, as we know it. On October 13th, 1913, they enacted the federal income tax. Now, actually, there had been one earlier in the late 1800s and off and on, starting the Civil War and stuff. But since 1913, October 13th, till today, it's been 100 years since federalized blatant slavery under a different name has been in place. Hooray! So I thought this would be a good opportunity to make a video about something I've been meaning to make a video about anyway, which was a lot of people keep asking me, what about that tax thing? Why don't you talk about that anymore? And some people say, did you decide you were wrong because you went to prison? No. Or is there some injunction? Are you not allowed to talk about it? No, I'm allowed to talk about it. It isn't any of that. Or is there some deal? No, there's no deal. The reason I don't talk about it very much anymore is pretty simple, which is most people don't care. It's a complicated enough issue that most people don't even want to look into it. And even allies, even people in the freedom movement or whatever you want to call it, they jump to a whole bunch of assumptions when you say, hey, the income tax isn't what it appears to be. And so almost nobody is ever able to think about it objectively, so it just sort of makes the discussion pointless. Ultimately, it's irrelevant. Now, a lot of people wonder, well, did your experience with the IRS turn you into an anarchist? No, I already knew government was bogus years before then. And so they said, well, why do you bring it up at all then? I was hoping, the reason I brought it up at all, first of all, the reason I got into it is when I heard about it and looked into it, it looked like a puzzle to me. It looked like a riddle or a fraud that somebody didn't want everybody understanding, which is totally what it was. But when I found what I found and did my research and stuff, I was hoping that even the people who bow to government, even the people who believe in authority and all that garbage, might care if they found out that they were being defrauded by their own government, even according to its own rules. Now, ultimately, it doesn't matter. Eventually, when humanity grows up and realizes there can't be such thing as a ruling class, we don't need to dig through all their gajillion pages of law book stupidity to understand that we own ourselves, this won't matter. So in one sense, this is sort of trivial and irrelevant. But it is a massive fraud, and it's a provable fraud, and I was hoping that even statists would sort of care if they were being defrauded. Turns out they didn't. Trouble is, most people are really bad at analyzing evidence, especially evidence which conflicts with what they already think they know, with their paradigms and their assumptions. And so, in the tax honesty movement and outside it and everybody else, hardly anybody could objectively examine the actual issue. And I found that as soon as I started looking into various theories in the tax honesty movement, a bunch of them totally don't hold water. There are people taking things out of context, presumably by accident, but sometimes it seems like people make stuff up and lie about it on purpose. I can't always tell the difference. So there's a million theories out there that are bogus, and this just sounds like one more, so people categorize it in their head as, oh, this is some tax protester thing, right? And the time and effort it takes to actually understand it and look at the evidence, people just didn't want to take that time, which I can sort of sympathize with. I long for the day when people won't need to dig into the magical scribblings of politicians because they won't freaking matter. But the reason I don't talk about it is it matters to hardly anybody what the actual evidence is. And it's sort of like if you have, suppose you have two scientists and there's a whole bunch of evidence in front of them, whatever it has to do with, biology or something. And one scientist says, well, I've analyzed all this and I've come up with this theory. I believe that this connects to this and this relates to that and there's a causality between this and that. And the other scientist says, shut up. Now, which one do you think is the more persuasive argument? because for 10 or 15 years, that's basically what happened between myself and a bunch of other people who found this evidence and became familiar with it, and the people in power. We said, hey, look what this actually says. It says this, it says this, it says this. And they say, shut up, we're going to hurt you and we're going to call you names. And that's the debate. And I thought, who on earth would be persuaded by that? You know, if the second scientist punches the first one, there, I'm right, because I punched you in the face. That's the mentality of the federal government. And I thought, who would be persuaded by that? You know, you might be scared to do anything about it if you think they're going to hurt you. But who in their right mind thinks that's a valid rebuttal? That, well, I believe I found this, and I believe this means this. Oh yeah? Well, we're going to put you in a cage. Well, you must have been wrong. You got put in a cage. Apparently, a lot of people think that way. So that's a little frustrating. And the fact that this works even when the evidence is completely undisputed, when there isn't a rebuttal. Like I said, the other scientist, that he doesn't explain the evidence, he doesn't have a counter explanation or a rebuttal, he just insults and threatens and punches the other guy, and that's his argument. And that's really what the government did for over a decade. That was their entire response. There was no rebuttal. Now, let me show you what I mean. I'm not going to get all the way into the issue here, the legal issue. I will tell you how to go find more information about it. My taxable income report has been free. It's always been free. It's still out there if you actually want to understand it. But I'll just give a couple examples that stand alone by themselves. It doesn't matter if you understand the issue at all or even what it was about, just to point out the way people think, or the way people don't think, more accurately. Conventional wisdom about the income tax. If you ask your tax professional, well, how do you know what's taxable? If they know anything, they'll say, oh, Section 61 of the tax code. Yeah, I know a section number. It says everything in the world is taxable. And if you read that section, it gives a general definition of gross income, and it says gross income means all income from whatever source derived, and then it lists things like compensation for services and interest and business income. And so you read that section, and it sounds like gross income is any kind of income you can get. That's the conventional wisdom. It's what all tax preparers are taught. It's what they believe. Now, there are certain sections of the tax code that'll say, well, this particular thing is exempt. Life insurance proceeds, they're exempt. That's what one section says. And gifts, they're exempt from the income tax. It's a different section. So every CPA, every tax attorney will tell you, well, all the duped, mainstream, clueless, ignorant ones will proclaim everything in the world is taxable unless you can find one of those sections that says this in particular is exempt. That's conventional wisdom. You'll see it all over the place in textbooks. Ask any CPA, any tax attorney. Read the IRS, like they're legally worthless pamphlets and manuals, and everything under the sun will say everything's taxable unless you can find something that says it isn't. Well, during my tons of study, I came across a section of the official federal income tax regulations. I'm going to show it to you. And it says, yeah, there are some things in the tax code that point out that specific types of income are exempt. And then it says, no other items of income may be exempt, meaning they're not subject to the tax. No other items are exempt from the tax, except those items of income which are, quote, under the Constitution, not taxable by the federal government, end quote. So these are the official executive branch regulations saying, in addition to the things that the tax code says, yeah, gifts, life insurance proceeds, those are exempt, something else is also exempt from tax. You're not supposed to report it, you're not supposed to pay taxes on it, because it is, to quote the Secretary of the Treasury, under the Constitution, not taxable by the federal government. Okay, that one line by itself, never mind if you understand anything else or know anything about the issue, that one line shows that every single tax preparer you'll talk to, except the weirdos who believe as I do, doesn't know what he's talking about. He's wrong. Conventional wisdom is absolutely wrong. That one line shows it. No, everything is not taxable except what's statutorily exempt. There are some other things that are exempt because of the Constitution. What I showed you was one page that happens to say that. The federal income tax regulations have said this since before my parents were born. And it moved where it said it. It changed the wording of how it said it. At one point it said neither income exempted by statute or fundamental law enter into the computation of net income. Fundamental law meaning the Constitution. But it's been there. for over 80 years in the official executive branch regulations that are now published in the Federal Register that tell you what's required of you. And year after year, they have proven conventional wisdom to be dead wrong. Now, I'm not even getting to, well, what does that mean and my explanation of that. You can look that up. I'll tell you how if you actually want to understand the issue. But that one line shows that conventional wisdom is dead wrong. And here's why I bring that up. That line, hundreds and hundreds of people, actually it's up to thousands of people now. Some of them, I organized some of these. We did letter writing campaigns, writing to the Commissioner of the IRS and the Secretary of the Treasury and the President and several hundred congressmen and senators and a gazillion offices all over the place and said, what does this mean? Why does it say that there's some income that is exempt from the income tax because it is under the Constitution not taxable by the federal government? I mean, if some of my income fits in that category, I'd like to know so I don't accidentally pay taxes on what your law books say is not taxable. Could you tell me what this means? Now, here's my main point. Here's why I want to make this video. I want this one point to sink in. In my trial, in all the trials of other people, in all the IRS form letters, and all the IRS harassing people and raiding people and wiping out their bank accounts and stealing their houses and stealing their cars and harassing people and calling them names and saying, that's frivolous, blah, 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 blah. All the court cases saying you have to pay your fair share. Never has this line been mentioned. Ever. No tax court case, no district court case, no appeals court case, no Supreme Court case, no IRS ruling, no revenue ruling, no technical advice, no form letter, nothing at any level has ever mentioned this. So this is why I say this is evidence that's undisputed and unrebutted. They didn't come along and say, oh, you misunderstood. See, that refers to fill in the blank. They never did that. They used the method, and apparently it worked, to just not ever mention it. They'll say frivolous tax protester scheme, but they never mention it. They don't say anything about it. You won't find it cited anywhere. They don't give a counter explanation of the evidence. They just pretend it's not there by not talking about it. And the reason I don't talk about the income tax issue much anymore is because that worked. All they had to do was not mention a smoking gun. A line which shows that all the conventional wisdom that all the tax experts are out there parroting is wrong. And instead of rebutting it or trying to come up with some explanation, they just don't mention it. And over a decade later, people didn't seem to care. We don't mind that you have no rebuttal to this evidence. And that's one line. And there are lots of other examples. Again, I'm not going to get into the whole issue, but they will point at 61 and the general definition sees, there's a list of income. It's talking about everything. Everything's taxable. Well, today I can point to a official Treasury regulation published in the Federal Register that says, yeah, those items listed in 61, compensation for services interest, sometimes they're exempt. And you should look over there to find out whether yours are exempt or not. And I brought that up to the IRS, and hundreds of other people brought it up and says, wait a minute, it says sometimes they're exempt. And they hem and haw, never have they mentioned that. Never has any court at any level mentioned it. Any IRS ruling, the whole thing. For over a decade, nobody on the other side has mentioned that it says that those items are not always taxable. And then it points people to a different section. Guess whether anybody's ever mentioned that section? Nope, never mentioned it. Because that section says, here's when they're not exempt. The following income is not exempt, meaning this is what is taxable. This is what is subject to the federal income tax. I'm not going to show you what's on that list. You're going to have to look it up in my taxable income report. That list has been there for 80-some years. Actually, we're coming up on a century. There is a list in the official regulations. It's there today. It was there 90-some years ago. It was there all the way in between saying, here's what's not exempt. Here's what you have to include. Chances are really high, if you go look at that list, your income won't be on it. And for all those years, in all the trials, in all the letter writing campaigns, and all the IRS meetings, the ones I've been to, the ones other people went to and recorded, and we publicized it, the other side has never had an explanation for why is that list there? Why am I not on it? If I owe this tax, why is there a list that says, here's what's not exempt, here's what you have to include, and I'm not on it? Why am I not on it? Instead of explaining, instead of even trying to rebut the evidence, they just pretend it's not there. And that works, and that's why I don't talk about the issue. The fact that that has worked for over a decade shows that it isn't worth pointing out this evidence. And there's a lot of other things. I mean, there's a whole bunch of regulations that say if you're trying to determine your taxable domestic income, your taxable income from inside the U.S., use these sections over here. And they've said that for ages, and those sections for 90-some years have very clearly said if you get compensation for services you perform in the U.S. or interest on U.S. investments or income from doing business in the U.S., you have to pay taxes on that income if you are one of these people. Look it up. You're not one of those people. It says it in black and white. And it has said it since before my parents were born. Again, the other side doesn't rebut this. They don't say, well, you misread that. See, that's referring... They just don't ever mention it at any level ever. And the fact that that works for more than a decade, that this didn't spread around because all people had to hear is, oh, well, they said it's frivolous and the courts have ruled against this and you're some tax protester, schemer guy thing. And that's all they needed to do to make hardly anybody pay attention to it. I'd say hardly anybody. There were thousands and thousands of people. Percentage-wise, that's hardly anybody. And the fact that that method still works on the American people shows me that the American people don't really care about evidence. Putting evidence in front of them when there's literally no rebuttal for a decade and they still don't pay attention, why keep trying to put it in front of them? All they can process, and this was very obvious at my trial. At my trial, I presented a bunch of this. I managed to get some of this in front of the jury. And the prosecution and the judge didn't address any of it. They didn't say, well, this is what that means. They just said, no, everything's taxable. That was it. And the morons on the jury, even though I just showed them on a big screen the citations from the official law books showing that conventional wisdom is wrong, showing them a dozen different ways, all they could process was, well, authority says you owed it and you didn't do as you're told. And that was it. None of the evidence mattered. And unfortunately, that seems to be a pretty good representation of the American people, is they don't care about the evidence. If authority says, that's ridiculous, they'll say, I guess that was ridiculous. Never mind that it's in black and white and anybody can look it up and it's publicly available. It must be ridiculous because big, powerful people said it was. And if that's enough to persuade the American people to not look at evidence, then, that's why I kind of don't bother putting that evidence out there. I mean, it's out there. My taxable income report is out there. My theft by deception video is still available. The 861 evidence presentation we did. It's still all out there, but most people have demonstrated that when it's something that complicated, they don't want to put in the energy, and all the other side has to do is say, you're a horrible, greedy tax cheat, and we're going to hurt you. And people say, oh, never mind. Then I don't want to know. And I could understand if somebody said, wow, this is fascinating. I don't dare to stop because of what they're going to do to people. And I warn people about that the whole time. I never said, do what I do, nothing will possibly happen to me. I said, from the beginning, whatever they do to me, I'm going to show them for the liars and crooks they are, which I did. Would have been more fun to do that and get acquitted. But 12 complete imbeciles on a jury said, no, you didn't do as you told, you must be bad. Never mind that I just showed them the direct citations of law showing that the judge doesn't know what he's talking about, the prosecutor doesn't know what he's talking about. All the IRS agents that I got on the stand admitted they couldn't explain it, hadn't seen that, couldn't answer my questions. They admitted this on the stand in front of the jury. No, we didn't rebut it, we didn't show them anything, we just said, I don't know, we'll get back to you. And that was good enough. We'll get back to you was good enough for the jury to say, well, you must be guilty, because they said, we'll get back to you. And I want to add, and you can see this if you go, if you watch Theft by Deception, which is not a light watch. I mean, I made the thing. I can't watch it all the way through myself. It's very concentrated, tons of information and evidence to follow. If you do it in pieces. But it very clearly shows a huge pattern going on for 80-some years of them moving things around in the law to make it harder and harder to find that it says, here's what's taxable, and guess what? It's probably not you. And so the pattern of where they move things and the wording changes very obviously shows intentional deception. And my taxable income report goes through that and all that. So it's not, this isn't, oh, you found some loophole. You know, and this is the government saying there's some things we can't tax. This is their official regulations. Oh, and people say, oh, after the 16th Amendment, they could tax anything. Well, what I just cited, the regulation saying there's some things under the Constitution not taxable by federal government, it said that after the 16th Amendment. And the Supreme Court has said the 16th Amendment did not make anything taxable that wasn't taxable before. It did not extend the federal government's taxing power to new or exempt subjects. Basically, it had no impact on their power to tax, on what they can and can't tax. And the regulations for years and years and years and decades afterwards, after the 16th Amendment, kept saying there are some things that are under the Constitution not taxable by the federal government. Here's what you have to include. But people don't care. They just want a quick escape. Like, well, the 16th Amendment changed all that. Well, no, it didn't. Their law books say it didn't. So that's basically why I don't talk about it, because given how few people know about it today, after more than a decade of a debate which literally consists of one side saying, here's what your law books say, Mr. and Mrs. Government Employee Person. It says this, that seems to me to lead to this. Do you have some other explanation? Can you answer this? Can you explain it? And the other side says, you're a dummy face, we're going to hurt you. And the general public says, well, we're going to side with you're a dummy face, we're going to hurt you. And they have, so far. They've sided with brute thuggery, with no rebuttal, don't even talk about the evidence, just pretend it wasn't there, and cage people and raid people and call them names and you know, send out their character assassins and all that fun stuff to attack anybody who says, wait, look what their law books actually say. Incidentally, I'm going to disable comments under this video because inevitably there'll be a wave of extortion apologists who come out, you're a convict and tax fraud scheming protester and you're just a man, and it's just sort of, you know, really? That's the rebuttal and nothing else. The courts have ruled against this. The courts, you mean the human beings who wear black dresses and get paid by the people that I'm accusing of fraud. Gosh, I can't imagine they would have any conflict of interest, can you? So it's, but the mentality of people is apparently more eager to accept, well, they're going to hurt you, and they called you nasty names. This is crazy. It's absurd. It's frivolous. And given that that's the way most people analyze evidence in this country, I just don't put it in front of them very often. If people want it, for those, you know, who like to look into things and think about it, it's still there. You can get it all for free. See it, and it's pretty fascinating. And yeah, I would warn now, like I did the entire time, it's dangerous to be right when the government's wrong. Like there's a Plato quote. And it's very true. Like, I've never said, do this and you'll be magically fine. When I did what I did, I didn't say, hey, everybody, do this. I said, hey, everybody, don't do this, but watch. Because whether I win or lose, they're going to be lying fascists. And they were. And they raided my house, and we had this ridiculous mock kangaroo trial, and all that fun stuff. And I'm glad that thousands of people have said that watching that actually taught them a whole lot about reality, because what we read in the civics book and what you see on the news has nothing to do with how the system really works. So at least some people got that out of it. And maybe what's the saddest is that even the tax honesty movement, only a very small percentage of the people in that have I found to be objective and rational. People want to sort of, this theory sounds good, I like this. And if you ask them even just to explain it, you quickly find out they don't really understand it. They didn't look into it themselves. It sounded nice to them, so they clung onto it. That isn't any better than clinging on to conventional wisdom because it's comfortable. You know, it's not any more scientific to say, well, I want this to be true. But the effort to look into this, because this was a very elaborate, intentional fraud, followed by a massive cover-up and deception, it does take a lot of effort to look into it, and most people don't have the time, especially when it sounds like there's no way that could be true anyway, so why take the time to look into it? So I sympathize with a lot of that. It is sort of frustrating that to all of this pile of evidence, I've just mentioned a little bit. If you want the big pile, go read Taxable Income or watch Theft by Deception, or look into this issue as much as you want. But it's pretty depressing that most of that evidence, all the other side has to do is never mention it, and then it just doesn't matter to most of the world. So that's why I talk about it. Yes, I was absolutely right. I was right the whole time. I can totally prove it. The other side doesn't have an argument except, shut up, we're going to call you names, and then we're going to hurt you. If you consider that persuasive, then please don't ever pay attention to anything I say, because I sort of think evidence and logic determines truth, and punching people in the face doesn't. So that's why I don't talk about it. It isn't because I was wrong. I was absolutely right the entire time. And of course, people who have a lot of power and wealth to lose by the truth getting out attack anybody who talks about the truth in public and makes a big public display of it, and what they did to Wesley Snipes and what they've done to others. This is what we will do to you. This is the mafia. Federal mafia, as Irwin Schiff puts it. I disagree with some of his conclusions, but he's a fine example of, they basically gave him a life sentence for having an interpretation of the law that they don't like. That's who we're dealing with. And apparently that's enough to keep most people from looking at evidence. And it's kind of sad, but anyway, happy birthday, federal extortion racket. And that's why I don't usually talk about this issue. But if you want to find out more, it's still all out there. And those people who do look into it will often tell me, how could this have been out there all this time and it hasn't spread? I said, good question, because people just don't care. If they have evidence on the one hand and a big scary authority figure on the other hand, they care more about the big scary authority figure and won't even look into the evidence. That's just the unfortunate reality of the situation.